Hey, Dr. Christianson here. Thank you so much for the feedback and the clarifying questions that came in after my EMF piece. You know, this is a big thing and I want to really make sense of it. It's important that we get it right. So let me back up by just defining things a bit more. So how is it that something that we cannot see, how could it actually affect us physically? Well, that happens through radiation or through fields. And in terms of radiation, there's two big categories. There's non-ionizing and ionizing. And let's make sense out of that. So radiation in this sense is electromagnetic radiation. And that's basically some kind of a particle, like a photon, for example, that's moving along in a wave-like motion. And the closer together, the shorter the wavelength, the more energy that particle carries. And that's kind of intuitive because the particle goes from here to here at the speed of light. And if it goes there straight, well, that's pretty fast. But if it goes up and down every millimeter and it still covers that same distance, that's even more energy. So the shorter the wavelength, the more energy. And if the wavelength is even narrower than the diameter of the electron cloud orbit around an atom, then that charged particle could bump the electron out of its orbit and it could induce a chemical change or make an ion. So we call that ionizing radiation. And that's what happens when you get sunburned, for example, is that there can be UV light that causes changes to the DNA and causes cell mutation in the underlying dermal layer. And that's how you can develop skin cancer from sunburn. UV light is actually the weakest form of ionizing radiation. There's others that go up from there, like X-rays and gamma rays, cosmic rays. So funny thing, but the scatter plot called X-rays used at the airport are actually not X-rays. They're microwave radiation. They're not ionizing. They're not in that category that can induce chemical change. Ionizing radiation, along with skin cancer, if you're exposed to deeper penetrating ionizing radiation, that's been clearly shown to raise the risk of many, many other cancers. You know, back when they used to use X-rays to treat sore throats, and sadly, a lot of people who were treated that way had higher risks of thyroid cancer later in life. You know, Madame Curie herself died of, I don't remember what form of cancer, but she X-rayed herself a lot all the time and had no sense about the dangers of it. So that's ionizing radiation, and it's common that all things radiation can get thought of as ionizing radiation. That's kind of how microwaves sound scary because they nuke the food with radiation. Like, well, in all honesty, microwaves are a lower energy type of wave than infrared heat. So if you don't use the microwave, you'd use the stovetop, right? Or even like a campfire. Well, those are using infrared heat. Those are higher energy waves than microwaves are. They're also not ionizing, so none of those things induce chemical change. Now, electromagnetic waves that are not ionizing can induce physical change, and that's when they heat things. That can be a thermal effect that they induce. So if you've got enough infrared heat, you know, I live in the Sonoran Desert, and I think it was last year, we had to do the whole, you know, fry the egg on the sidewalk thing. And we put out a cast iron skillet in the sun, and this was a crazy hot day. It was close to 120, and let it sit out and dropped an egg in the black cast iron skillet. And yeah, it cooked over a period of time. So what happened was the infrared heat from the sun that was absorbed by the pan and radiated back to the egg, as well as what was directly from the sun, those induced a structural change in the amino acid sequence of the albumin, of the egg white. And they coagulated that protein and made the liquid into a solid. And that's like a one-way reaction. That's an example of how these electromagnetic waves can cause physical change, even if they don't cause chemical change. And they do that through their thermal effects or through heating. And so microwaves, they cook food and they can cause a thermal effect on the food and they can shift it because of that. Now let's come back into our EMFs. So EMFs, we've got electric fields, magnetic fields, and then radio/microwaves. The electric and magnetic fields, they mostly overlap. The difference is just that magnetic fields are present when you've got a current flowing in something, so when it's turned on or operating. They're also present in just like magnets, like refrigerator magnets or fun magnets from science school. You know, there was a time in which magnets were thought to have properties that were medical as well. But yeah, magnets make magnetic fields, currents create magnetic fields. Now, static electricity creates an electric field before it's discharged. So if you're ever outside on a thunderstorm, rainy night, and you feel your hair standing up, you may be close to being struck by lightning. That's actually an electric field creating that effect. Now, electric fields and magnetic fields can be thought of really together as electromagnetic. To be precise, when they're generated by a magnet that comes about from a moving current, that's then electromagnetic field. And these things we found, they can affect physical systems. So the amount of milligauss present can actually cause changes to the health of tissue or living things. And the effects are localized greatly by distance. So magnetic fields drop off really fast once you get a little bit a ways away from them. On the other hand, the radio waves, the microwave, those fields, they can cover more distance. And we'll come back to those. So the magnetic fields, we do know, even if they don't heat something up, they can still cause some effects. And the thresholds have been debated, whether it's 5 milligauss, probably the lowest threshold thought to do something would be 2 milligauss. And these studies have come about from prolonged exposure. And what does that mean? That means basically living in a home that all of your environment, your whole ambient level is 2 or 5 milligauss or greater. It doesn't mean you've got a plug-in somewhere that generates a few milligauss. No, it means everywhere in the house it's that much or more. And in those cases, the risks are real and they're quite plausible. And there actually are people who live in those situations. It can happen, and it's good to be aware of and good to make change. We can also see these high amount of milligauss show up right around areas to where you've got like your power junction box, like the breakers for your home. There could also be some ungrounded wiring, or you could have some high power tension lines over your home, and you could have these fields present. Okay, so that's about the electromagnetic fields. And the data is clear that they can have thermal effects, they can heat things up, they can like cook the egg, but even apart from thermal effects, they can be harmful to living tissues. And in many cases, devices that generate these electromagnetic fields are making electric fields as well. So they can have some static field that's there even when they're not operating or not in use. And same thing, that electric field, if that's high enough to create a certain amount of milligauss present, that can have some effects even apart from just dangers of heating. Now, let's talk about the radio/microwaves. And I'll talk about these as radio waves to make it simpler, because it's just a function of the wavelength, the difference. So these are things that are used by devices to communicate over some distance. Because remember, the magnetic fields, they just drop off so abruptly with any kind of distance. They couldn't be used for communication tools. But radio waves can. We use them for radios, but also Bluetooth devices, AirPods, and your cell phone, when it connects to the cell tower, that works via radio waves, as does your home's Wi-Fi. And the feedback I got was, you didn't talk in much detail about Wi-Fi or show the testing of that. I'll show the testing a bit. Let me get a little more concept here. So radio waves, they do pass through living systems. They are non-ionizing forms of radiation. So they cannot induce chemical change via ionization. Now, if you were close enough to an extremely high power source of radio output, there could be thermal changes. And that's, again, how microwaves work. They do heat things up by microwaves. If you're outside the microwave, just try heating up a cup of water that's sitting on the counter next to the microwave. It won't heat up. It works only inside the unit. So the thermal effects are quite limited. And you can easily measure with a thermometer if there are any thermal effects coming from your Wi-Fi. Not even a thermometer, it's your hand. You can feel if there's heat coming off from that. And really, if you're any distance away, there's no big thermal change. So the question is, can radio waves affect living things apart from ionizing radiation and apart from thermic effects if they're not heating? And the answer, based upon all of our current science, is no, they cannot. Now, they may be coming from a device that does also put out electromagnetic fields. And that field, the magnetic effects can affect living things if they're in proximity to it, if the field is high enough, and if they're there for long enough periods of time. So in those cases, yes. But the radio waves themselves, they do not affect living things. So your Wi-Fi device, there will be some electric field, some magnetic field associated with it when it's in use, when it's plugged in. But the radio waves from it, they themselves cannot affect your health directly. And they're not even measurable to an appreciable degree. So the unit, just to give you a quick little more depth because I didn't talk about the other readings on it in very good detail. So you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 dial settings on this, and you've got 3 gauges. First setting is just off. Next one is battery test. And you guys can see the needle bump over. It's got a battery in it. It's charged. Next up we have the magnetic field. And this is on the 0 to 100 Gauss range, or the very top arc. You would use this for measuring a very high intense field because you would see units that would be meaningful. The next setting is really the same thing, but it's at smaller units. And this is now in the middle scale. So this is an accurate reading for lower level magnetic fields. This is between the 0 to 5 Gauss range on that middle ring. And then the very next reading we have is the electric field. And this one is also going to be showing up on the top arc, the 0 to 100. So this would show up for some version of static electricity or a device that were plugged in but not operative. And last we have the radio and microwave. And this shows up on the very bottom scale. And this is down from 0.01 to 1 on its scale of waveform intensity. So we've got these various types of EMFs, and the one thing we know is that magnetic fields create non-thermal effects on living tissue. We also know that any of these could have thermic effects. They could be just out and out heating if they were really, really powerful. But the radio waves by themselves, they don't affect living things, and they're not even measurable at anywhere besides where you'd measure a magnetic field. So I'll show you in just a minute how this works with our Wi-Fi unit, but all the readings I did before on the cell phone, on the Apple Watch, on the AirPods, on the laptop, on the computers, on the junction box of the home, I did measure all those things for electrical fields, magnetic fields, and radio waves, and there never were times in which something had a high radio field or electric field, but no magnetic field. So kind of 2 factors, one of which is that the radio waves or electric fields are not known to really affect living things apart from their magnetic effects. Not only that, they're just not really found in any sources apart from their magnetic effects. So let me show you about the Wi-Fi here. Okay, so for radio waves, I wanted to show you an example here. So here's the tri-field meter again, it's off. Here's the battery test mode, it's got a valid battery in it. And now I'm over on the radio/microwave register. And this is read on the closest in dial. So right now there's no measurable radio waves or microwaves. And this is the room in which our Wi-Fi system is kept. So we've got an Apple Airport Extreme router, and we've got our modem which connects to our cable system. Now, right now, there's a download going on downstairs across the house. So this system is operating and it is putting out radio waves. There's none measurable right here, but if we get very close to the unit, we'll see that there are measurable radio waves coming out of it. So right now I'm probably about 2 feet away, 1.5 feet, maybe a foot, less than a foot, and you can see there's some measurable radio waves present. When we back off, they're gone. I'm just going to show you the same unit in terms of static electrical waves, electrical field, also nothing. We're going to see a little bit as we get closer here. There's a power source, so we expect to see electric fields show up. And that's actually stronger by the plug-in than it is by the devices. And then last, here's the magnetic reading. And also, same thing. It is present, but much more pronounced as we're close to the devices and close to the power source, even much higher close to the power source.